welcome back to another video, or rather I'm just sitting here reading a little bit about underwater photography in this vintage book. But yeah, let's see here. T.B.Photo X1.5 TFX, and welcome back to another video. Well, in this installment we're gonna take a deeper look at the DX1G from CNC with the accompanying what is it now again? I can never YS-110 strobe unit. Well, I talked about this constellation in a previous installment, but I thought I would do a little bit more of a review of it, or rather an overview of some of the basic functionalities while using this system in manual mode. But anyway, this system has then the 10 megapixel CNC DX1G in this dedicated underwater housing and the YS-110 strobe. And this strobe is basically triggered via this fiber optic cable. And a little bit of a tip here, I use actually hair bands to attach it to the entire system as such, so it doesn't flop around in the water while in use. But yeah, I think I'll just say that yeah, this is what this video is gonna be about. Fingers pushing buttons, keeping on top of things with silicone lube, being flashy with flashes, blowing bubbles, take it all outside into the wild, and I'm still sitting in a chair. Hello and welcome to this little overview and partial review of the CNC DX1G 10 megapixel underwater camera system. Starting on the top panel we have the power button, the mode selector dial, the flashed release lever and the oval trigger button. As well on the front side we have the scroll wheel for f-stop. Trying to start the camera without first removing the lens cap will result in an LCD display warning stating to remove the lens cap. Pushing in the multifunctioning ADJ lever will display the menu system for white balance, ISO, autofocus, manual focus, and the subsequent drop-down menu associated with that particular function. The CNC DX1G has a native ISO of 80 to 1600, and as a rule of thumb for underwater photography or any photography in that matter using off-camera flash, a good rule of thumb is to use as low of an ISO as possible in order to get as little noise as possible in the resulting images. By toggling the ADJ switch in the manual setting, you change the shutter speed, and for the DX1G the shutter speeds can go from a maximum of 1/2000th of a second all the way to 180 seconds. Notice how the histogram changes with the changing shutter speed, and also the exposure meter going from plus and minus when the shutter speed is changed in the manual setting. During normal operations, the arrow keys also function as different functioning buttons, as in macro on and off, and flash operation mode like soft flash, flash off, auto, red eye delete, and so on. And the center button accesses the menu system with settings and setup. During manual shooting, one of the more important controls is the front scroll wheel, which is responsible for controlling the camera iris, or the f-stop, or depth of field. So during operations you will see in the display the f-stops here 7.2, but as I manipulate it, it will go up, increase and decrease, letting in more light and thereby also giving you a shallower depth of field. The depth of field will also change with the zoom factor. As you can see here, with us zoomed all the way in, it will go up to f15, and it isn't really affected by using the different modes as in close up. Now we will have a brief overview of the basic functionalities of the DX1G. We're gonna go over how to put the camera into its proper underwater housing. While working with the system on a tabletop, it's a good practice to lay out a clean towel of some sort in order to prevent scratches on the surface. For everyday maintenance, please refer to the recommended grease and perhaps use a O-ring removal tool to prevent damaging O-ring. In order to open the camera back, gently squeeze the two red tabs on the locking mechanism and the lock will disengage. Another good praxis is to feel along the edge of the O-ring to feel that it isn't pinched or have any kind of damage or debris on it. To remove the O-ring, gently pinch on both sides, sliding your fingers forward so a little bit of a loop opens up, and you can gently slide it off to inspect it for cracks and debris and to lubricate if need be. When lubricating an O-ring, just a tiny amount of grease specified by the manufacturer is needed. Just a little bit of, quite not even a pea-size little dollop will go a long way, and pinch the grease between two fingers and then pinch the O-ring between the two greased fingers, sliding along the entire length of the O-ring, dispersing it evenly. And in the meantime you can also feel for other imperfections. When the O-ring is properly re-greased, gently put back into its groove and make sure it doesn't pinch or snag on anything and that it's seated properly all the way around the O-ring groove. To prevent any nasty surprises while hitting the dive site, a good practice before putting the camera in the underwater housing is to open the battery door cover and make sure that you actually have a battery loaded, and more importantly also, equally important, a SD card to record the images. Also make sure that the flash is extended in order to make sure that it can work underwater and trigger a underwater strobe. If a leak would occur in the underwater housing during the dive, it's a good practice to put in a small pack of silica gel beads in order for them to absorb any moisture that might collect inside the camera housing, either during the dive from condensation because of changing temperatures, or if worse would come to shove, a leak. After closing the latch, feel around the groove between the door and the main housing in order to see that it's properly seated and not a uniform gap has formed. finally putting the entire system together for a final check. The flash holder, the arm and the bottom plate goes on the tripod lug on the bottom of the underwater housing, thusly. A good insurance policy is to have double redundancy. Here I'm putting the lanyard that is put on the camera and I'm attaching it to the keyring loop on the bottom plate. So if the tripod screw would come undone and the system would separate, I would always have a safety line that would keep them together. The off-camera flashes are triggered primarily by a fiber optic cable that goes from the camera in the same elevation as the on-camera flash, and the flashlight will go through the fiber optic cable and be illuminating a slave unit on the flash gun itself, which will trigger the flash firing. The flash arm might feel very unwieldy and flimsy like this on the tabletop, bearing the full weight of the flash, but on the water the friction and the buoyancy differentiation will actually be a quite noticeable or even dramatic effect, which makes it much more easy to manipulate underwater, and it will stay in place. The flash battery holder, the cover of the battery holder, has also in itself a O-ring, and it will be removed in a similar fashion as the main camera housing. And as with the camera housing O-ring, the flash battery cover O-ring has to be inspected for any debris, dirt or any cracks or warping of the O-ring, and if need be a little bit of grease would be applied to this part as well to prevent leakage. And now for something completely different. We're gonna go over the YS-110 TTL strobe unit. Even though that with the CNC DX1G you can't really use the TTL system as such, because we're triggering the flash with a fiber optic cable instead. The controls on the backside includes the 4-position on-off switch, the slave mode with center modeling light, and the stepped flash power setting dial. One drawback with using these flashes underwater with thick wetsuit or dry suit gloves is that it's a little bit hard to get a good purchase on the power setting dial with gloves on. Using the translucent flash diffuser underwater will actually change the Kelvin value of the flash from 5400 Kelvin to 5100 Kelvin. A slight drawback on the YS-110 is that there is a hole in the flash diffuser that means that you have to remove both the fiber optic cable and the flash diffuser in order to put it on and off, as demonstrated here. For demonstratory purposes, we're using the CNC on-camera flash holder, which is recommended by the manufacturer to be used with close-up and macro photography. Otherwise, this will give a more harsh look if used with more wide-angle type photography. To access the battery compartment, rotate the tabs counterclockwise and then pull outwards. You will notice that even the battery cover is O-ring sealed. Make sure to grease this properly and inspect it between usage to ensure that it isn't warped or damaged or any debris. It takes 4 AA batteries. Here I'm using Claes Olsson rechargeables, and they are put into the battery compartment thusly. There are instructions printed on the inside of the battery compartment showing the polarity of the batteries. To reinstall the battery cover, please align the two dots on the battery cover with the third dot on the outside of the flash housing. There is a notable click when it's in the fully locked position as such. This reminds me of something. Now I know!
"100 kiloton yield. The effects are indistinguishable from the American medium-yield bomb. The detonator." Now listen carefully. It is preset for a 4-hour delay. Set time for the explosion here. To activate, insert and twist the lever a quarter turn clockwise. Be at least 20 miles away when it goes off.
Anyway, let's move on. The back control dial has 4 positions: off, manual 1, manual 2 and TTL. For our purposes we're gonna use manual 1. The center has a red LED to indicate that the strobe is ready for use. The slave function on the back has an on-off auto-rotating color, and in the middle you have a modeling light on-off switch, which is demonstrated here. The modeling light gives a fairly concentrated beam of light that is viewable in the camera's display, and also when the flash is triggered, the red light on the back will actually go out until the flash is ready to be used again, and the same goes for the modeling light that will be turning off when the flash is triggered and turned on automatically again when the flash is ready to be used again. Let's now take a more in-depth look at the back panel of the YS-110 flash unit. As stated, it uses 4 AA batteries and has a guide number of 22. And the Kelvin value is 5400 without diffuser and 5100 with diffuser. Starting from the left, we have the 4-position switch for off, manual 1, manual 2 and TTL. The difference between manual 1 and manual 2 is that manual 1 is if you use a camera that emits a pre-flash, and manual 2 is for a camera that has no pre-flash. The center control is the slave unit on-off that works in conjunction with manual 1 and manual 2, and it has a center push button for the built-in modeling light. And as stated, if the flash is triggered, the red LED in the back and the modeling light will be turned off momentarily until the flash is ready to be used. Furthest to the right on the back panel we have the flash power dial with 13 increments of motion from full to minimum. Minimum is guide number 1.4 at 100 ISO, and full power is guide number 22, and this is on dry land. On the bottom we also have the socket with a cover for the TTL system. Now for a quick demonstration with the system in action. Here we have it all mounted on a tripod in order to have it a little bit more for demonstrational purposes. So in this demonstration I don't have any SD card in the camera itself, which explains the long time between trigger pull and actually camera going off. Note now the time also it takes for the modeling light to come back on, which means that the flash is ready to be used again. Also confirmed with a red LED light on the back side. Also can be noted here that there were half-empty batteries in the flash unit, which explains the prolonged recycle time. But with fresh batteries, the recycle time is cut much shorter. As a video camera, the DX1G is nothing really to write home about nowadays. When it came out, it was a camera that was right in the beginning of the full HD boom. So just to clarify, this is then what was considered standard definition, the format that was mostly prevalent before full HD. So this was taken in a pool at Fyrishov during a CMAS 1-star class for dry suit. So yeah, and a little bit of sample imagery. This one was taken in the pool with fairly decent lighting conditions, and if memory serves, I was using ISO 100. But still, because I had kind of weak batteries in the flash, it was a little bit fidgety when it wanted to work and so on. Also, note that it's not just backscatter, but if you have a little bit of schmutz on the front lens of the camera housing, that will really show up very well indeed on the images. So one more quick tip for you if you're gonna use this camera is to really clean the surfaces of the housing, the glass surfaces of the housing, in order to prevent discolorations in your images. So in summary, who is the DX1G for in modern day underwater photography? Well, I would say, in my humble opinion, after using this camera system for a couple of dives, it is for the beginner underwater photographer that doesn't want to break the bank when it comes to his first camera rig. Well, in my opinion, this is not a modern day good underwater video camera. As you can see, for the graininess on this standard definition film by the DX1G in very favorable lighting conditions and clarity because it's pool water after all. Well, but as a stills camera, if you can use manual shooting modes, if you are comfortable with using manual flash and so on, and the biggest advantages with the DX1G is the ability to shoot raw, even if it just is a 10 megapixel camera, just in quotation marks, but it is for the avid beginner that doesn't want to splurge out a small fortune on his first underwater camera rig. Well, that's my opinion anyway. Yes, pool diving by all means, it's a great way to test out new techniques, practice, and to check out new equipment before using them in an open water situation. Well, this video that was taken here was not taken with the CNC DX1G, but with a Kacpark action camera. Well, it might be a subject for a future video to do an overview, review, and function video about the Kacpark action camera, but here it's basically a little bit of a background for the snapshots that were taken with the DX1G during this day of diving. During these dives and using of the DX1G, I was using mainly a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, ISO 100. The f-stops was a little bit varied depending on the lighting conditions, and the YS-110 flash unit was set at its maximum setting, which is equal to guide number 22. Keep in mind also that there were a couple of times when the flash failed to fire because of lack of battery power, I presume, but all in all, this was a really interesting experience in my beginnings as a underwater photographer, or rather a amateur underwater photographer. So in closing, for most of you seasoned underwater photographers out there, a 10 megapixel compact camera in an underwater housing might not be the most appealing piece of underwater photographic equipment out there nowadays, but for the beginner aspiring underwater photographer, I should probably say, this might be a good starting off point in order to learn composition and using different types of photography such as wide angle, macro, close-up, and so on, and a little bit of videography to see the differences between stills photography and video photography underwater. A good point for the DX1G or similar camera system compared to a more popular action camera underwater might be the heft of the system itself. In my opinion, the heft of this type of system will actually give you a little bit more stability compared with the lightness of an action cam. Yeah, of course, and I would like to dedicate this video to Martin Sutton and the team over at Fisheye of Grand Cayman that did this series of Nikonos, I know, CNC Nikonos, yeah, but they did this video series about underwater photography a couple of years ago, or rather, really long time ago now. It's from the early 1990s, since it's on VHS, but I had this converted into, into a digital format on DVD and USB, so to speak. But I thought that, photography techniques are photography techniques no matter what type of medium you use, if you're using film or digital like this one. But as always, this is Tobias Bergstrom from T.B.Photo X1.5 TFX, and I'd like to see you guys in the next video. And as always, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. So take care from now on. Bye.